Hello friends, Mr. E here, reporting live for Sloptide News Network, your most trusted source for all things Darktide, and of course, Slop. Today brings a rather large patch to Darktide, hotfix 1.10.6, which is massive buffs for the Hive Scum. So before I dig into that, let me remind you, if you want to help grow independent games journalism in the Darktide space, you have only one option. That's me, Sloptide News Network, and Mr. E. So you should subscribe, help me reach 40k subscribers, and dominate, absolutely become the monolith of Darktide News. Now, let's talk some Hive Scum stuff, guys. I'll put on the screen just the beginnings of several buffs he's getting today because, wow, they are glowing our boy up. As I predicted before the break, the Hive Scum will be receiving further buffs in the spring of this year because this is a high skill cap class. It is a class that a lot of people have a very difficult time to perform and actually produce results with. And so if you're a skilled player, now is the time to buy Hive Scum stocks, guys. Invest in Hive Scum and you will see your results rise because the vast majority of players cannot play this class, and so it needs to be buffed in order to bring it to parity with other classes for that lowest 90% of the player base. If you can make yourself in the top 10% of Hive Scum, top 10% of players, you are going to be eating very good, just in the way that very skilled players eat very well playing Psyker and the like. So that is what's going on here, and let's address our first buffs, which are buffs to the Stimm Lab. I'll bring it up on the screen here for you. The Stimm Lab, and I'll put the description of what the buffs are text-wise as well here. The Stimm Lab has had an upgrade to this top left defensive branch of the Stimm, which is great because I have gone on record as saying that this branch of the tree was more or less useless. Now what this is going to give you is an upgrade to, instead of giving you regeneration, which is only applicable in terms of coherency regeneration, which is a useless sort of talent in the game. It really only goes into effect when you're near your allies and no enemies are near you, which is almost never. Then it has been changed to toughness replenishment. So now each of these smaller nodes, barrage 1 through 4, is going to give 6.25% of your toughness back for a total of 25% toughness once it's all capped out at 4. You can also get 5% toughness replenishment, which is capping out at 20% toughness replenishment at barrage 4, and an additive 4% damage reduction, which caps out at 16% flat damage reduction at barrage 4. So those together are quite good, and you know that is opening up this branch. But it goes further because now we can diversify into these last two nodes here. Regain is going to give you 5% toughness every second for the duration of the Stimm. So this is actually going to make it so that extending your Stimm by 5 seconds with long lasting here is going to be quite good. Or now, alternatively, if you have Stimm supply equipped and you provide this to your team, not only are they getting all those previous buffs, but now you're also replenishing 5% of their toughness. Actually, scratch that. Because of the toughness replenishment buff of 20% here, you're going to be replenishing 6% of their toughness every second for 15 seconds, provided they step in your Stimm supply. So a very quality defensive buff, sort of akin to like being in a Psyker bubble all the time, like somewhere a little bit lower than that, but still very good to have that passive regeneration going on. But I think that the real winner here is this one over here, Tank. 30% additional toughness replenishment, taking your total toughness replenishment, say that 10 times fast, to 50%, which is a 50% increase, a 50% multiplier on all sources of toughness gain on the class. And if you apply it with Stimm supply to all the other characters in the team, all of the classes on your team. So yeah, think about that for a second, right? Just take into account anything that gains toughness on this class while the Stimm is active is going to be multiplied by 1.5. So precision violence, instead of being 4, 8, and 12% for the prerequisite hits here, as you can see on the screen, will now be 6, 12, and 18. And voice of tertium will, instead of 8 and 15, be 12 and 22.5% toughness regain. The one that I think is going to be really powerful with this is Tis by the Scratch, which previously was replenishing 30% toughness over 3 seconds. This will be 45% toughness over 3 seconds, aka 15% of your toughness per second, which is really good. That's going to keep you super safe from a ton of gunfire. And then, of course, when you're incorporating that with Stimm supply and applying that to the whole team, it's great. And you also have buffs to things like chemical dependency and chem fortified, which will multiply that 50% toughness replenishment and add that up to being 75%. Oh, and also, of course, burst of energy. If this is triggered while burst of energy while the Stimm is active, it'll go to 75% toughness replenishment, which is a big boost. So this Stimm, the branch, just got a massive buff here and is very viable now for both solo play, especially if you're going like frontliners sort of melee and you might not be the cleanest player in the world, and also for Stimm supply play, which I think is really cool. So I'm very glad they took a look at that, because I had said previously this is a very useless branch and no one really wants to take this at all. And yeah, now it is extremely powerful, so look forward to seeing that incorporated in more builds. Now that is just the beginning though, because that is a buff to the Stimms. There are buffs to this class and the actual talents as well. So let's show those on the screen here. We now have a buff to cheap shots, which is, I'll scroll back to the talents, all the way down here. Cheap shots now, instead of giving 15% damage against fully staggered enemies, now has trigger effects on lower staggered enemies. So starting at the bare minimum of staggered, including like very light staggers, such as enemies taking a half step backwards or so, that enemy will then take you will have 10% additional strength against them. So that's quite good, because 10% strength gives not only damage but more stagger potential. That will make it easier to push them into that medium or heavy stagger state, where they will now take 15% increased damage, which is good. I mean, this makes it much more usable. And of course, for things like the Uzis, right, these weapons do have a sufficient amount of stagger, but it wasn't generally enough to get them into the heavy stagger state before they died. But it's very easy to get them into the light stagger or medium stagger state usually, where they'll take 10 to 15% extra damage. So not bad at all. Definitely an upgrade to otherwise pretty unusable perk. Then we have to come over here to Unload, which is going to be giving a buff in the sense of, it previously was only triggering for a maximum of 7 seconds after you reloaded, right? And so if you couldn't expend enough of your ammo during that duration, it would reset, and then you would be starting over from scratch. Now it refreshes every time you spend that ammunition. So you can cap this thing out, which means if you're just constantly firing, then you're going to have this thing capped out. This becomes a very good perk for weapons that are shooting a lot, which is a lot of Hive Scum weapons, especially when going Desperado builds. And we also have not received any nerfs to Pickpocket, although there are murmurs and whispers that there are some ideas floating around out there that Fat Shark has been prototyping. I'll look into the evidence and the backing for these claims, but that Fat Shark has been having ideas about what they might want to iterate on Pickpocket with. Because Pickpocket right now, I think flatly is probably not healthy, in the sense that it's very easy to replenish 20% of your ammo if you just use the last 20% of your ammo to shoot and kill a single elite. So that might be receiving some changes, but for right now, we're all good, Hive Scum gunners. Now, we did have an additional change to Nimble, but most of the changes to Nimble, which is right here, are going to be in the text and how it is explained. It is, instead of saying your dodge is extended by 25% and extends your dodging time, it now specifically spells out that extension of the dodge is incorporated through dodge speed, basically telling you that yes, you're going to launch 25% faster when you dodge, which functionally does extend the duration of your dodge by 25% and also gets you the hell out of there 25% faster. This talent is responsible for why Hive Scum can launch themselves across the map. And it also extends the time considered dodging by 0.15 seconds, although they have made it clear that this is additive now, which means that it's going to be much more forgiving against a range dodge than it is against a melee dodge, just because the windows for dodging those two attacks are fundamentally very different. So, sorry, it'll be more effective against melee than it is against ranged. Yeah, because the windows against those two is very different. Now, the really big change here, guys, is going to come in the form of Rampage. So let's talk about Rampage. Rampage previously had the downside of exhausting you once the ability ended. However, that is all gone, simply removed from the game. So now Rampage simply ends. There is no downside to Rampage running out other than you no longer have the buffs, which I think for most players is a big everyone stands and claps moment, because for a lot of players, especially medium low skill players, and even some high skill players, Rampage running out and putting you into a terrible, terrible position all of a sudden was awful. Felt really, really bad, and it made it limiting to play. There is some argument that certainly the forums here, we'll talk about in a second, are engaging with that, saying like, oh, that was part of the fun, is like, oh, figuring out how to play this. But for most players, you have to remember, guys, that the vast majority of players in Darktide are fighting enemies in what I would consider what I would call RuneScape style combat, right? They lock onto the enemy, they walk up to them, they hit them. If the enemy doesn't die, the enemy hits them back, and then they hit the enemy back until one of them falls down dead. And that is why the Arbites is such a powerful class, and many newer players rank the Arbites as the most powerful class, is because he's very easy to do that with. The Hive Scum is not a character that you can do that with pretty much at all. So just making this slight buff here, I think is going to help mostly. It's going to be a buff to those new players who were being just completely clapped by the sudden, oops, my ability ended, now I'm dead, sort of realization. There's also been a buff to this ability modifier on the side of the Rampage ability here, Channeled Aggression, which is going to give, or previously gave, heavy attacks 25% rending when you were over 50% remaining duration on Rampage, which, as I explained in my rankings and videos and talking about this class, that is just too many prerequisites. You have to be in Rampage, you have to be using a heavy attack, you have to be attacking a target that actually rending is effective against, and you have to be over 50% duration. Almost never is that happening. Now, this is a kind of a reasonable pick if you are into a lot of Carapace armor. You know, for instance, if you're playing Havoc and you know there's going to be Carapace armor enemies out there, I don't think this is going to be very necessary on most weapons. Most weapons on the Hive Scum are pretty good at Carapace cleaving already, but this will help, you know, get 25% true damage against Carapace. And remember that rending is really only effective as a stat buff against Carapace, so really just for killing crushers, right, guys? So this still isn't amazing, but at least is functional now and might be good for something like Crowbar. Now, there is one more change here that is to Pocket Toxin. And Pocket Toxin, previously I have explained that Pocket Toxin I didn't think was very good, outside of course, the blackout grenades, because blackout grenades were able to be thrown more or less infinitely as you claim kills, and they give 3 stacks, right? So this turned this from a do no damage, knock enemies around sort of blitzed into, oh, all light armored enemies in that area are now going to wither away and die, which is great. But 3 stacks of Toxin, when applied by a Boombringer, by a rocket launcher that literally vaporizes everything within 100 feet of it, was quite comically small, right? I couldn't imagine anything surviving the rocket launcher and then dying to 3 stacks of Pocket Toxin. So they have upgraded that to 6 stacks, which will maybe help to erase the final vestiges of life from anybody who wasn't immediately atomized by the Boombringer's initial explosion. And then more notably, they've given a big buff to Chem Grenade here. So Chem Grenades, let's go ahead and talk about Chem Grenades. I'll put the upgrades for the changes to them as well on the screen. Chem Grenades here previously were exploding and having a 20-second area of effect. This was simply too long, as I've stated previously. The Immolation Grenade is completely trumped by this grenade in terms of damage and duration with that. They have reduced this from 20 to 15 seconds, which I think is still very fair, because what this was doing is it effectively just shuts down one entire direction for enemies for that entire duration, right? Because all enemies that walk through it will accrue up to 6 stacks, and then they just die and they explode, and when they explode they stagger nearby enemies, and they also deal some direct damage. So yeah, this was erasing all hordes and lightly armored enemies that are walking through it for up to 20 seconds. Now it's 15 seconds, but now you can also take the Pocket Toxin talent with it, which will give any enemy in its radius when it initially explodes 10 stacks instantly, which helps to make up for one of its main weaknesses, which is that if you drop this in a situation where you need the effect now, it didn't really do anything right now because it takes time to ramp up to those 6 stacks. Now it immediately will apply 10 stacks, and notably that's more than the normal 6 stacks cap that Chem Grenade has. So every enemy in the initial affected area will immediately take 10 stacks, which is more than enough to kill every enemy in the game right now, barring bosses. So 10 stacks everything in the area, crushers, bulwarks, whatever, they're going to die with 10 stacks of Toxin on them, which is quite good. So Chem Grenades, getting a nerf in duration, but getting a big buff with the interaction there, because previously they didn't have any interaction at all after it was nerfed from the pre-release version, which was quite broken. So that's the buffs that we have gotten to Hive Scum here, and then the rest of it is just talking about some general fixes. Notably, things like the damage from needle pistol toxins not triggering effects, like the speed loader, the reload speed buff at the top of the Hive Scum talent tree, and Vulture's Mark buffs. So like this one here and this one down here. So that's nice that they're making that work better, because the needle pistol toxin is kind of a weird interaction. Not that needle pistol really needs any buffs. And then, of course, we have to touch on the cosmetic fixes. One in particular that I have a sweet spot for is the Pyre Blade fixes. Of course, the Relic Blade's best skin, one of its only skins, honestly, was having the VFX not... The glowing wasn't going all the way down the blade. So they fixed that up, so now this glorious skin is even better for your Relic Blade uses. Now, let me switch from objective news reporter mode into the opinionated Mr. E giving his commentary on these changes mode. How do I feel about the Hive Scum changes? Does the Hive Scum need any more buffs? It's a bit of a mixed bag here, guys. If we take a look here, I'll show you some of the forums reactions on the screen here. They aren't exactly very happy about this, and of course these are elitist players that don't understand the plight of most players in the game, right? The Hive Scum for many players in the game is pretty much unplayable. That is the reasoning behind when I recently put a poll up and asked what your favorite, most fun class to play is for you between the Arbites and the Hive Scum. 2/3 of players said the Arbites, which means double the amount of players think Arbites is more fun to play. You know why that is? It's because those players can actually stay alive playing Arbites. For Hive Scum, a lot of players are dropping dead instantly. So, as I've said in the past, the time to get good at Hive Scum is now. It's time to invest in the Hive Scum stonks, because they are surely going to rise. We are only going to probably see buffs for this class for the underperforming stuff. I imagine there will probably be buffs to Desperado, right, coming some way. I imagine there might be buffs to the Keystones down here, because they'll realize that these are completely underused. That stuff is probably coming the way of the Hive Scum, because the Hive Scum is very hard to perform with for the vast majority of players. So if you're in the upper skill bracket, of course, your skill is going to get you additional power out of this class that other lesser skilled players won't be able to access, and they're going to try to endeavor to make that more easy to access. And that is, of course, going to make your play experience more powerful as well. And that's just kind of, something that is going to happen as a result of trying to balance in that way. Do I have a problem with this necessarily, or the problems that I saw here today? I don't think so. I think that the nerf to the duration on the Tox Grenade is something I agree with. The initial burst of 10 stacks might be a little bit OP. Giving the Pocket Toxin an interaction with these grenades, with the other grenades, that is valuable in some way, shape, or form, I think is fair. But this is already a powerful talent, even with just Blackout, right? And you're already down here on 95% of cases. The Rampage buffs, which seem to be the most contentious among the, at least the forum-going community, I think these are perfectly fine, because most skilled players were already understanding how to work around the downsides of this, and it will mostly serve as a buff to unskilled players, to players that are just getting blindsided by the downside of this ability for seemingly no reason, and they just can't fundamentally understand how to play around it. Right there, playing that RuneScape style of combat. So if you are a Dark Souls style Hive Scum player, then you're just gonna be just fine. This probably won't affect you a whole lot, because you already knew how to play around the weaknesses of the class. So I personally believe that it's okay to have a class like Hive Scum get more power, because in the way I see it, most of the power on Hive Scum, especially with an ability like Rampage, is very much trapped in your personal skill. Outmaneuvering enemies and attacking enemies in melee and having finesse and the ability to dodge and evade and stuff like that, that is very much a skill-based thing, and you can get amazing results out of the Hive Scum, but it does require a good amount of skill input to get that result. The difference I strike between that and something like a Flamestaff Psyker is that the Flamestaff Psyker is a incredibly uninteractive and low skill requirement build to put together and use, and it is also at the same time, perhaps one of the most OP builds in the game, the ability to just burn everything to death forever. So yeah, I think that it is okay to have high skill cap classes that can do insane feats of damage if they're risking life and limb to do it. I don't think it's necessarily to have them be able to do that with something like an infinite ammo flamethrower. In the same vein, I don't think it's okay to have a smite ability that can literally last forever and do millions upon millions of damage. The only real problem I have with Hive Scum right now, in terms of its balancing, is that I think that things like Boombringer are just completely overtuned, and the reason that I have a problem with things like Boombringer is because they just simply are point it in that direction and immediately delete everything within a quarter mile. And that is uninteractive, and I think that it removes some potential fun from the game. Although it is very fun to see it explode once or twice, it's not fun to see every major enemy pack that's coming towards you throughout an entire game get exploded over and over and over again, because one pack of grenades provides 4 fuck you, everything dies buttons for this class. Same thing I think applies to Chem Grenade, which is probably something they'll have to revisit later. 15 seconds of area denial of like annihilating a whole horde, doing hundreds of thousands of damage 4 times, a full minute of just annihilating everything is quite powerful. So yeah, those sort of things are uninteractive in the way that they are powerful, but Rampage is a very interactive ability, right? It requires you to get frontline and go crazy, and I think that it is incentivizing players to get more into this aggressive playstyle. What I'd love to see next is some buffs to Desperado, because, yeah, it's going to fall behind, and if and when they do nerf Pickpocket, remains to be seen what they do there, but they'll certainly have to make up for it by giving more power to Desperado if this is reduced so that we don't literally have infinite ammo anymore outside of Desperado. And yeah, that's everything I think I have to say for the day. So if you enjoyed the information, if you have any thoughts about the balancing, if you have any ideas where this changed from here, or should they revert these changes and just scrap it? Maybe they should delete the class entirely. Let me know in the comments below. Thank you very much for watching, guys, and thanks for supporting Sloptide News Network. I'll see you next time. Mr. Yao, bye-bye.